kind of fun to see some of those old.
Isn't that fun? And a
Yeah,
nice
it
little
really
shout out to Kate McMurray, who's here, another winemaker as
We
well,
just-
and carrying
yeah.
on the McMurray family legacy.
I just said to Kate, what's it been? She said, follow me, boys. It was 1965.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
That was fantastic, being with your dad and your mom, and now seeing you.
Very cool. So how did this whole romance with wine begin for you?
Really, Goldie and I would go on these. We were going to go on these bicycle trips to Europe. She'd been to one in Germany, and so I kind of joined in on one of them, and it was a bike/wine trip. And so we did a few of them, and I found that the ones that took place in Burgundy and Bordeaux were kind of my favorite. And
really?
Goldie said, I think they're your favorite because of the wine, not because of the trip. And I said, yeah, that's true. I said, I really like the Burgundy area. So we found ourselves going there, and it was during that time that we also went up to Napa, up in your neck of the woods there. And I started, finding that I really did like wine. I loved Chardonnay at that time. I was drinking very little red. And I just sort of fell in love with, especially Chateau Montelena. Goldie and I spent an absolutely fabulous afternoon, one afternoon that was memorable. And the fact that it was such a memorable experience, I think I attached to the wine. And then once again, we would go back to Burgundy, and I find myself now being, and because you're an actor, you're recognizable. You get an opportunity to do things that a lot of people don't get a chance to do. And one of them was that, some people would say, are you interested in being involved? And really what you realized was they were trying to sell you their winery. They were trying to get out of the business and get you into it. Yeah. And so that became very evident, but I was kind of saddened by that because I thought, what a shame, I really would like to get involved in making wine. And then I'd really like to learn to make wine myself because I really knew the kind of wine that I thought I wanted to do. But unfortunately, that apparently only took place in Burgundy. And then in 2007, I was doing a Quentin Tarantino picture called Death Proof in the area of Santa Rita Hills. And I started looking around, and of course on my off days, we go wine tasting. And there was something about the Pinot in that AVA that I really liked. There was some similarity that each one of them had. And I wasn't crazy about the wines, but there was some aspect of them that I attached to Burgundy. And having had the opportunity to been many different places, go around the world and taste Pinots from everywhere, I thought, wow, this place might be kind of interesting. And sure enough, about 6 months later, a man named Greg Gorman introduced me to Peter and Rebecca Work, who owned Anclos Wine, and the winery and the vineyard that they had was where I would be sitting in my car with a girl named Zoe Bell attached to my hood. I was about ready to take off at 100 miles an hour to try to wreck her.
That's incredible.
And I would be looking at that vineyard.
Sign.
There was that vineyard, so I thought, yeah, that's a good sign.
That's very cool. So going back to what you were saying when you would take various trips and you were into Chardonnay, how did you make that leap from Chardonnay to being a fan of Bordeaux and Burgundy?
It's actually a history, I guess, that many share. And my sister Jamie, who's actually very wine-wise now, and she runs GoGi Wines, she said that's often the trail. That's the journey that wine drinkers take, and they often start with Chardonnay. And if you get to drinking wine, it's like I always said, I don't pretend to be the world's greatest at knowing this and that about wine. But Bob Parker wants to sit down and drink wine, no problem. I got no issue there. I'm a very confident wine drinker. So
very cool.
I said, I guess this is where it takes you. And Jamie was telling me that's often the case. You start with Chardonnay, you start with whites. You kind of work your way up often to sweeter ones, and then you find yourself going into the different reds, and generally you get yourself into the Bordeaux blends and sometimes the Super Tuscans, and pretty soon you're going to find that a lot of wine drinkers find their way around to Pinot because It's pretty magical. It's very complex. It's as complex as anything there is we have in terms of wine and food. And it's unmistakable, and it's a mystery. And I just found it to be a complex wine that I fell in love with.
Well, I'm excited that we're going to get to try one of his Pinots today. So let's talk about GoGi wines. Where did the name come from?
One of the first things I said was I didn't know what to call my wine, so I thought, in vino veritas. It was a line from Tombstone.
Love it.
Doc Holliday says that Johnny Ringo, when he's fooling around with that tin cup, and he goes, in vino veritas. So I thought, veritas, I'll call it. Taken. Everything was taken.
Yeah, that's
so I go, well, okay, what about Russell Sellers? Taken. So finally I was like down to this thing, and Peter said, I got to put the label on. You got to come up with a name. And I went, oh, I said, I know what I'll call it. Because I wanted to name each vintage after a family member. My dad was a ball player, and the baseball runs deep in our family history. Everybody had a nickname. And so I wanted to name each vintage after a family member that it reminded me of, that had some connection to the wine. And we have lots of nicknames in our family. But my nickname, I was a little boy, and so I told Jamie, this is what it is, but I'm never going to tell this story. About 3 hours into giving somebody about, where's GoGi? Well, here's the GoGi. So my middle name is Vogel, and when I was a little boy, people say, what's your name? I would say Kurt Gogo Russell.
I love it.
So I couldn't say Vogel, so Gogo was it. So I grew up as Gogo, which turned into Goginski, which turned into GoGi.
You guys really do variations on the nicknames.
And so GoGi was my nickname. So the overall brand is GoGi, but every year of the Pinots is a different family member. This Tiger is a family member, is my cousin from Maine, and
that's great.
And the only thing I did was I called each vintage of the Chardonnay will always be Goldie, which is why that bottle looks the way it does.
That's very
and
cool.
It's a fun thing to be a part of her foundation. Each one of those bottles, a percentage of the funds go to her Han Foundation. So anyway, GoGi became GoGi because that was my nickname, and it's great because I also was warned at the time that people might not be able to pronounce it correctly. And I thought, how do you mispronounce GoGi? GoGi Grant? Nobody can miss that.
There you go.
Everybody calls it GoGi. It drives me crazy. I hate the GoGi berry. It has nothing to do with the GoGi berry. And so all I can do is say, well, for those of you who think Gaja is a good wine, welcome to GoGi. It's GoGi. 2 G's, 2 hard G's, GoGi.
And now you've got the scoop. And I should say, as we continue on, you're going to see some classic and vintage photos and video and things like that. So if you would, keep the cameras down during that time and save that just for the room. That would be marvelous. And we'll save.
It's always fun to keep stuff in the locker room, guys.
Right, right. Okay, so let's do what we came here to do, and that's